Welcome to the Core Women Podcast, the place for women entrepreneurs, authors, and self-starters looking to build community and gain valuable insights through expert interviews with women at the top of their game. Join your host, podcaster, producer, expert coach, entrepreneur, and author, Dr. Summer Watson, as she aims to inspire and empower you through these candid conversations. Lean in and embrace the journey. It's time to start the show. Here's your host, Dr. Summer Watson.
Today on the show, I would like to welcome Shay Walker, who is a recent Boston University graduate and incoming law student at the University of the District of Columbia. Over the past 4 years, Shay has passionately fought against food insecurity, mass incarceration, homophobia, environmental racism, medical injustice, and mental health stigma. Her work with organizations like Reform Alliance and Queer Activists Collective is driven by personal experiences of detention and involuntary hospitalization. Shay's story highlights the interconnectedness of oppressive systems and their commitment to a future where those in need are supported and not criminalized. Get ready to be inspired by her incredible journey. Welcome, Shay.
Thank you so much. That was quite the introduction. It's an honor to be here.
Well, it's an honor to have you on the Core Women Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you.
Before we dive into the professional aspects of your life, if you could describe your journey in one word to this point, what would that word be and why?
I would definitely say unexpected.
Ooh.
Just because everything, my reality, the way I live my life now, even where I am to be in Boston and on this podcast, it's all very unexpected, but also welcomed. And I'm so thankful for all of it. But honestly, this isn't what I thought my life would even amount to at this point. I'm still very young. And within recent years, I've had so many setbacks that I was like, oh, this is it. This is my defining moment. I'm not going past this point. Just to be from the South and to be Black and to be queer and low income and to be here and to be a graduate of Boston University without having to take out loans to have my education funded, to be able to give TED Talks and to lead to connections that allow me to be on this podcast today. Everything has been so unexpected, but such a blessing. And it's really been necessary in fortifying who I am as a person and my morals and my values.
Oh, goodness gracious. We have so much to cover. You are so incredible. I do want to take a step back and tell the listeners, for full disclosure, I did meet Shay at her TED Talk. I went there to watch a friend do his, and I saw Shay on the big red dot, and I was so impacted by her talk. And I thought, well, I want to know more about this person. She's amazing. You really struck me as just very insightful, impactful, and your experiences that you've gone through and what you've highlighted along your journey and how you've shown such resiliency. I want to talk about that here today. Let's talk about your upbringing, where you grew up, some of the things you experienced, and speak about today, such as environmental racism, detention, involuntary hospitalization, and how this has influenced your passions to help others and influence systems and communities take a deeper dive and look at how they are contributing to the oppression of others. Let's talk about this.
Yeah, definitely. I think from a very young age, I always say like my life was an act of resistance, and it still is. I have a lot of identities that people don't agree with, a lot of identities that show up in legislation, whether they should be legal or not or allowed. And so from a very young age, I understood my place in the world as somebody assigned female at birth and the roles that come to that and that are put on you. But also from a very young age, I wanted to push back on those. And a lot of that was informed by and inspired by my queer identity. I think there's this misconception that you got to grow up and go through puberty and do all this stuff before you know what you like. But I knew at a very young age. And so when you start showing signs and things I didn't even know equated to queerness or to homosexuality. I was displaying at very young ages, and I was in a household and an environment, the Bible Belt of the South, where these things were not normal. I grew up in the church. My parents are very devout. They sent us to religious schools growing up. So to be in these spaces and also to know myself, to show up as myself and to do it fearlessly took a lot of reworking of the mind. And a lot of times I just had to be willing to be scared or be willing to be different or be willing to cause conflict just to be who I am. It's not a problem of the world. It's just symptoms of what we're taught. Symptoms can be treated and outcomes can be changed simply by staying true to yourself. And so growing up in Atlanta, I am originally from Georgia, especially coming to Boston, it was almost like night and day. I always tell people it's like opposite, where there were Black people back home, there were all white people here. Where there was seasoning back home, it was not so much here. Where there was warm weather back home, it was cold weather here. It was like night and day. But it was night and day, and also in the way people lived their lives, in the resources that they had accessible to them. Things as simple as having trees in their neighborhoods, sidewalks lining their streets, complete sidewalks, the option of walkability, which is kind of spoken on in my TED Talk. But in social ways too, just the quality of schooling here, the access to having Ivy League schools and highly ranked schools in your backyard, that influences and goes a lot of ways. There's a lot of money here. There's a lot of resources. There's a lot of access. And a lot of things that I maybe grew up and blamed my environment for. My environment could only do so much because there was only so much available for the environment to actually be a source of help for me. I think a lot of times we don't see each other. A lot of our communities, the only reason our community is thriving is because we are either brain draining another one, we're getting our resources off the backs of others, or we're progressing forward at the expense of everybody else falling behind. And so while I love this city and I love the initiatives that it puts forward, and I love that it's just a city full of nerds, I also hope that the city uses its resources and its power to really outreach to the rest of the nation and the country, especially in the South, where a lot of people of color, and specifically Black people that are descendants of slavery that impacted all areas of this country, are. A lot of people in the South are in situations that have no escape simply because of how history has played out. But that doesn't have to continue, considering we have the resources, we have the funding, we have the knowledge, we have so many scholars with ideas of how we can improve our society for all. But we just don't have that connection. And I feel that's definitely needed. And it comes through conversations such as these, speeches such as my TED Talk, and just really getting curious about the world around you and the experiences of others.
There's so much you have just said here that we could touch on. One
Mhm.
of those things that I'm going to go back to, you were raised in a family that was very spiritual. You knew yourself from early on, and where you were different, where you identified as something different, not quite the same as maybe your other family members. And yet you were in the family system
Mhm.
where you were pushing back. You were just
Mhm.
trying to be yourself. Was that hard? Was that difficult? What happened there?
It's definitely difficult to be, I guess, demonized or criminalized for simply existing. I think, though, the only way to get those things to change is by continuing to show up. So while it was fearful and it was hard, I was more scared of never being able to be myself, or never finding who I'm meant to be around, never getting my chosen family if I don't have my biological family to support me in this way. The fear of that kept me going and kept me staying authentic. And from where I started to where I am now, like, my relationship with my family has changed. There's more understanding, there's more conversation, there's more openness. Is there complete acceptance? That's not mine to know, but that's on their heart to give to me, or to feel the guilt of not giving to me, even if they may display like they are accepting of me. But that is their own personal battle. And I am consistently and constantly having to fight my own just to live and survive. You know, a lot of times I imagine what my life would be like if it wasn't this hard to just be myself. But it makes everything I earn all that more valuable, because I had to go through so many barriers just to wear this polo shirt I'm wearing. I know you guys can't see, but I'm wearing like a shirt that would be considered masculine, or would be considered something that shouldn't be in my closet when I was growing up. But it just feels so good now to be able to exist in my skin, to be able to say, this is me, and to be able to stand up for it, because I have lived this way since I was maybe like 3 years old. And it's just now I'm actually coming to life. I would say at like 21 years old, I came to life and I really found out and discovered who I was and started making pathways to presenting that way. And it's honestly the best feeling ever. There's no better feeling than being your true self.
Oh, I love that. When you look at your past and you look at the family system, when you look at the schooling system that you were in, when you look at the state system that you came from, there was a lot of oppression.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you come out of that not feeling depressed, not feeling like there's a battle constantly, an internal battle, or even that external battle with the systems that you're constantly maybe in conflict with or having to
Yeah.
educate?
It's hard. It's hard. And I would be lying to you if I said once you get to some place, the depression goes away because the memories don't, right? The memories don't, as well as the knowledge and the reality that although I've made it to this point, so many people that are just like me may never get the opportunity and never had the chance. It's definitely always in your mind. As much as you're happy, it's a lot of sorrow and grief that comes along with it. There's a lot of people I've had to give distance to or shed out of my skin just because who I am didn't agree with who they were taught to love and to respect. It's very sad, but where there's much sorrow, there can also be much joy found. A lot of times, sorrow comes in the absence of joy. So that means it was there at some moment in time. So just as I can reflect on memories of sadness, I can reflect on memories of happiness, and those inspire me to create more happiness for myself. I much prefer those moments where my heart fluttered and my cheeks blushed and my dimples showed over those moments where I was crying and I was alone and I had nobody to understand me. So I'd be lying if I say you don't feel on some days like the whole world is on top of you. But it's important to remember and look forward to and work towards those days where you feel like you're on top of the world.
I love that. That is just so heart fulfilling. I mean, you just spoke to a spirit, your own spirit, to the spirit of possibly others that are listening to you today that needed to hear exactly that. Because there are those days where it feels oppressive, but yet you're still focused on that smile, that dimple, that lightness of being. It's amazing. How did you get to this point? Because even while you were departing from many systems of oppression, you were taking a step out. How did you even know to take that step out and apply for college, to go to the next step, whatever that passion was for yourself, when maybe that wasn't something that was modeled for you? So how did you go to that next step to really get past some of those systemic oppressive situations?
By the time I reached about junior, senior in high school, I was ready to get out. And I think the type of personality I've always had was exploration was at the core of my being. I would always be the kid mixing just different perfumes and toothpaste with water and calling it a potion, or going outside in the woods for hours and bringing home all these rocks. I always had this kind of urge to get out and see more. And so when I was a senior, and junior kind of summer, you're getting ready and having discussions surrounding college. College was always an option for me, and it was what I wanted to do. I enjoy learning. I'm pretty good at it. And also, it's not much else that's presented to you. It's either you graduate and you graduate high school or you go on to college. And I knew I wanted to do more. And I just was banking on it getting me somewhere. I remember not applying to any schools in Georgia. I remember just going through those applications alone. At the time, I didn't have Wi-Fi. I would get off work and sit outside of closed businesses with free Wi-Fi just to work on my applications. And I had a Girl Scout leader that was really behind me and championed me to go after the scholarship I ended up acquiring to pursue my education at Boston University. And so she would just be saying, you can do this. You can really get this. You've got everything. You're the full package. And so with time, I started believing that for myself. Whether I'm sitting outside McDonald's typing on a Google Doc, I am the full package. Whether I get into this school or that school or not, I am the full package. I can do this. I'm going to get this. And so I remember, I think I got like 26 acceptances, overwhelming amounts of money. I had so many opportunities and just security and self. And I knew I was going to get out of my situation because, as we've talked about, like, I grew up in active resistance. It was not fun. And a lot of my first year of college was seeing how truly bad it was. And it comes with a lot of anger. It comes with a lot of, why wasn't I cared for in this way? And it came with a lot of conflict as well with my own unit back home that grew me, because I was not loved in the way that I feel like I should have been when they had the opportunity to. And to come to that realization so young and at a place where you're 1,000 miles away, it really shakes you. And this is during COVID as well. So you're not seeing people every day. It was something that was very personal, and I spent a lot of time alone. So it wasn't really something I could run away from. And while it was liberating, it was extremely radicalizing. And, it was kind of just like, no more, no more, because for me to earn this for myself, despite everybody that was trying to keep me from it or trying to keep me from seeing my full potential and unlocking it, it took somebody from outside my home to see and to say and to instill in me, this is for you. There's
Yeah.
place for you. There are people out here that would love you. There are things that you can achieve that you haven't even thought of. To discover that has been extremely grateful, but it always comes with reflection and that grief aspect that we talked about. So while I'm proud and basking in all my achievements, I am also saddened by the fact that I went through so much to be this great, and that my greatness wasn't acknowledged when I was in much closer proximity to my support system, and that my support system became most active as I started achieving the greatness instead of seeing the vision before. I'm glad I saw it for myself, though. I'm glad I kept that exploration, that creativity in the mind that they usually try to get out of you in childhood, actually, because that is what you need to have a vision, to be crazy. I'm going to be great. I'm going to be successful. I'm going to go to college. It's going to be paid for. I'm going to go far. And a lot of people will make you feel like you're insane for having that belief in self, that much, that grandiosity, but it's actually very much needed when you are coming from a background where you are doubted, where you are plotted against, where your support is withheld, where you're not expected to be much. And it's just something I try to keep my mind and my focus on. And even applying to law school while in college, it was another beginning of the process, but I wouldn't have been able to even start or imagine starting or even having the opportunity to apply to law school, because you need a degree first, if I didn't do it the first time. So now more than ever, I trust my capacity, I trust my capability, and I'm not afraid to fail as long as it means I tried.
Well, brava,
Thank you.
brava, brava to you.
Thank you.
And here's the thing, too. We are speaking in terms of your personal experience, but there was something deeper where people were continuing to push back even while you were at college. Let's talk about that, because I
Yeah.
touched on that in regards to involuntary hospitalization. And
Oh,
so let's talk about that particular situation, because I
oh,
think
yeah.
people need to hear about this because it's
Absolutely.
so impactful.
So, as I said before, when you come to all these realizations about maybe childhood trauma, childhood abuse, just an inadequate space that you were brought up in that you didn't necessarily have to be. A lot of these spaces, they're not there because you're poor or because you're this or that. It's honestly a lot of times just a lack of care. It's neglect. And so, coming to that, like I said, I was angry, and who am I going to take that to first? The people that brought me up, the people that witnessed this, the people that were in control of a lot of what I experienced. And so from that blow up, it led into a period where I was arrested from my room, taken into involuntary hospitalization. And so the way that works is they come and get you. This is, again, 2020. So the cops showed up at my door. I'm listening. This was peak protesting for Black people being killed by the police. So I'm just anxious. I'm a teenager at this time. I go outside. They say, be calm or we'll sedate you. They pat you down and they take you. They take you in a vehicle, no windows, and you're put in like a glass box after that. They look at you for like 24 hours, and then you are moved into another part of the facility. As time goes on, it's revealed to you, if you don't know, you're in a psych ward. This is after you've signed away your rights and all these things. From then, once you're in the hospital space, I wouldn't say you're a patient or somebody seen as in need of care. You're more so a product, a project, and essentially just a payee. You're paying them. And in order to get the most pay, it's in their best interest to first come up with a diagnosis so they actually can start billing you for something, to treat you, to medicate you, to run tests on you, to do anything that sounds expensive in a hospital, which is everything. But while you're involuntary, you can't turn away from much. And so the first like 3 to 5 days was okay. I'm taking my medication, but each day the medication is increasing. And so maybe by like day 3, I'm getting kidney cramps, and it was getting bad to the point where I'm just walking, like holding my back, kind of waddling it. Another patient stops me because she see I'm like struggling to walk, and she's like asking me some questions. I'm explaining it to her. I have no knowledge of what really is going on. I've never been hospitalized. I've never been seen by anybody in the mental health field. And she's just like, well, I would ask your care team. So I take her advice. I ask my care team. And the response I was met with was much less than amicable. They took that, I think, as a stab at their authority. And we already know historically the medical system in America has been found off the experimentation of Black bodies. So to go in as a Black body or a Black person and to have say in your experience, it is not responded to kindly. Today, we see this reflected in many things, such as the mortality rates of Black patients in hospitals, especially Black mothers when giving birth. And so when I did that, I was like, I don't want to keep increasing. My body doesn't agree with it. I have lowered body temperatures. I have dry mouth. And they agreed to seeing my symptoms displayed. However, they did not agree to lessening the medication. At that point, I no longer wanted to take the medication, which resulted in me basically forfeiting the care. In an involuntary case, that gets kind of tricky because you'll have to go to court from here on out to get out because you're not taking the care. And so they immediately placed me in solitary confinement. I was restricted from water. Suddenly, my food kept coming uncooked. And it was the worst 2 weeks of my life. In secrecy, I wrote a note with a smuggled pencil that was going to be essentially the way I represented myself when I went to court. I did go to court. I represented myself. I read my note, and I was able to achieve freedom. But the hardest disconnect was when I was in there. I was definitely, while I still had phone access, making calls to the outside. I was genuinely in fear for my life. And I don't think a lot of people understand what that feels like. You're away, miles away from people you don't know. You're in solitary confinement. You have no food or restricted access to food and to water. They've taken you away from any forms of contact, even with other patients, also because they were standing up for me as well. And when you're translating these forms of abuse you're receiving to people that have already maybe neglected or abused you in some way, it's not as alarming as it would to somebody that is used to caring for you in a certain way. And at a certain point, the beginning of my stay here started from conflict with these same people I'm trying to tell, hey, this facility I've been placed in is not good for me. You know, it's not safe for me. And another thing that goes along with the stigmatization of mental health is your account is no longer a reputable source. So it's like, hey, they're not feeding me. Yeah, just take the care. I've heard so many times, just do what you need to do. Just take the medicine, just do this. And it's like, it's so easy to brush off or look past or to mandate somebody to do something without seeing them, feeling the effects. And also, this is how my credit report started, without having the bill on your hands. And so I came out of there with around $20,000 to pay them for that experience. 2 weeks of that was spent waiting to see a judge, but each day was about $1,000. And so it was just very disheartening. And it's also, though, very revealing to see how superficial relationships can be when it's actually a time of dire need, when it's actually time to be listened to for who you are, not for the situation you're in. And so somebody can know you your whole life, and you can open up to them and tell them you're in need of support, you're in need of help, you're in need, even just moving to a different facility, and still have no advocacy. You will almost always, when it comes down to it, have to advocate for yourself and by yourself, which is a very scary and interesting place to be in. But it's one that builds character like no other. And it's one that prepares you for so many things that extend beyond the system you may be trapped in, going into life. I can speak to anyone. I can get along with any people. I can withstand harsh things for much longer now. I can just say I have a certain security of self that wouldn't be earned from living a quote unquote safe or typical life.
Absolutely. That resiliency, that inner strength.
Yeah.
really is the ability to be able to rebound. To hear that experience is very alarming because I certainly wouldn't want to work in a space like that, nor would I want to see patients in spaces like that
Right.
at all.
Reflecting back, and even after that, so I was essentially removed from school as well because this happened.
Yeah.
I was 2 weeks of the new semester that started. So the day I ended up getting my phone back and getting back my freedom and things like that, almost immediately when I turn it on, I get an email. You've been placed on medical leave of absence. And so
Mm,
in order to get back in, I had to get a signature from a doctor. I had to be on medication, or at least say I was being prescribed something. I had to go
yes.
back into the system. However, I re-entered it in Georgia, and it was a night and day experience, the facility I left versus the one I was at. And I was even more astounded by how much ignorance of rules and that are there for safety, and how much ignorance of the patients this facility I was in previously had. And it was so scary to find out even the symptoms I was telling them about were symptoms of being overdosed on a medicine or leading towards that. And so it was just really scary. And I didn't learn what care in this type of field or space or area looked like until I got out of there. However, I had to go against a hospital and their
Yeah.
lawyers, and the fact that they could petition to hold me indefinitely to do that. And again, a lot of this was a very personal effort. It was done alone. You're in there alone. You don't have access to the outside world. If you use their phones, they're listening to your conversation,
Mm,
use it against you later. When they call your family, even if you're in the room, they're going to try to portray it or turn the narrative to where you're the one who is in the wrong. You're the one who can't be listened to. You're the one that has no type of sound thought. It was a very scary place to be in, and it's no place where healing can be done because safety is necessary for healing.
yes.
I think that experience has taught me that a lot. And I think there's a lot that we need to change about how we treat patients or anyone imprisoned involuntarily or because of their actions. There is no improvement that can be done in a space that has been built and constructed to further lead to your depletion, whether it be of mind or physical state.
Yeah, I agree that we need to continue working with these systems to look after the well-being of those people that are in those places, those systems, those hospitals. So thank you, by the way, for sharing your experience, because my goodness, the inner strength that you had to possess to be resilient, to work through that, to represent yourself, to not feel so isolated and alone, yet you did, but you made it through it, is incredible. So thank you for sharing those experiences with us. But it goes back to something that you said early on in the interview, and that is you hope that places like Boston University and those around those Ivy League schools can help not just those communities, but the larger context of the country in regards to getting resources to where they're needed. You are now one of those people. You are now one of those resources. You are going to be going to law school. I know you have a lot on your agenda. That's a lot in itself. To go to law school, that's tough. So what is your future plan, knowing what you've seen, being in these situations, being in these various systems, knowing that there needs to be more advocacy, more support, more change? What's your goal for that?
My goal for that is if they won't come to us, we have to take it to them. A lot of times, the reason we're left in the dark or not seen or not heard is because we haven't been given the opportunity or we're specifically targeted from infiltrating where they are. But if I have the opportunity to, I will always use my space to uplift and uphold the values that I grew from, the home that I still do call home despite the memories I have there, and the many people that I love and cherish and have been impactful in my life that still live there. I think we're spending a lot of time waiting on them to give handouts, but we also have to create conflict with them to see some type of improvement. And I think one thing that really showed me how conflict can lead to actually more forwardness was just like the topic of racism when coming from the North to the South. And that's something I speak on a lot and something I spoke on in my TED Talk. And even to be at BU giving a TED Talk on racism, environmental racism, and pointing a finger at Boston, it's a lot. And that wouldn't have been a speech that would typically be given. However, it's a speech that's given when people like me are allowed in rooms and we've worked to be there. So sometimes you have to take the fight to people. And my point about racism was, when I was in the South, everybody was like, the South is racist, the South is racist. But honestly, it was no big deal to be around white people, to say hello to white people, to discuss race, to call somebody out for racism, and even have maybe a white person say, oh, that's a racist. He's racist, And when I came up here to even bring up race, it was very like, eyes are going to widen, eyebrows are going to raise, but mouths are going to stay closed because people didn't want to touch the subject. And what I realized was that history of conflict surrounding race that occurred in the South historically for centuries and for decades and years, it led to a progression and a comfortability with conflict surrounding that topic that then in turn turned into improvement. We saw the civil rights movements, the biggest acquisition of rights, civil rights for Black people in America for all of history at this point. And we saw a kind of culture that developed where race wasn't something we shied away from. Race wasn't something we were in denial of its impact. Race wasn't something that we were scared to talk about. It was something that, because we had already fought over it, and we know that people are willing to fight over it, we actually had more respectability surrounding it while being able to explore it more. Whereas here in Boston, I think it's kind of this, well, we are the first to outlaw slavery, and we didn't do this, and we didn't do this, and we're in the North, and therefore we didn't actually have the conflict that was necessary to bring together and build comfortability as well as forwardness. And so, like I said, sometimes the fight has to be brought to you. Right. Sometimes it has to be put in your face. Sometimes, as the person who's already experiencing oppression, you have to go a higher level just to reach the people that are your oppressors, just to get in their face, just to have the opportunity to speak and hope to change the hearts of somebody that can actually do something for you. So in the future, I think I want to do more outsourcing, speaking to more crowds and more audiences that maybe would never even consider the reality that I have lived or consider the things that I speak about, because I can only do so much talking to the people that already experience it, talking to the people that have already been disenfranchised, talking to the people that are already limited in their financial capability and their educational endeavors, that are already limited. I have to talk to the people that actually have the resources. I have to show them what they can do and where they're wrong for not taking part.
Yeah.
So I think I've reached the level where I'm no longer scared to be in rooms that are not reflective of me or what I look like or what I believe. But I think being in those rooms and having those challenges creates that progress and that comfortability to touch those touchy subjects.
Yeah. And I do believe and hear what you're saying in regards to bringing the conflict. And I also think it's bringing the education.
Mm-hmm.
I love that you're bringing, whether you call it conflict, education, I'm loving that you're bringing it to new communities, because I think those first steps a lot of times are missing and people don't know what to do. So
Right.
The first step is conversation.
Right.
Here you are now as this, I know this is a lot of responsibility, but as a conduit, as a person to bring that into communities. Mm-hmm. Again, yay to Shay. Yay to Shay.
Thank you.
And yes, that's why I was so taken by what you were saying on that red dot about your own experiences in going into these conversations, even though it's a tough conversation, but having those conversations. Mm-hmm. Having those conversations of things that still need to be viewed, looked at, changed, and yet people may not know where to begin.
Right.
Maybe Shay can help them begin somewhere.
So,
and I think you can, because again, like I'm sitting in that crowd and I'm like, I got to know more about her. How is she doing this? Oh my gosh, the situation she's already been in, the resiliency she has within herself is incredible. So we've covered a lot of ground here. We could have a 2-3 second session, third session, on this podcast. But as we come to the close of the interview, my last question is, if you were to give the listeners one tip about new efforts yielding new results, what would that be?
Yeah, I think one thing that has come up a lot is being afraid to start, being afraid of what will come of it, being afraid to fail, just a lot of fear. And one thing that has been coming up a lot in my interviews is like, just do it scared. You'll never be prepared. It'll never be the right time. You'll never feel fully able. You'll always have doubts. No matter how much you manifest, no matter how headstrong you become, there's always the other possibility. But there's also the possibility that things could go right. There's also the possibility that you could learn the things you're lacking now, that you could grow to become who you're meant to be. And I remember one of my friends shared this quote with me: God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. And so whether you're religious or not, using that mindset, I don't have to be fully qualified. I don't have to have all the awards, all the accolades, but I can still become qualified. And so that first step is getting over that mountain of fear, whether it be the lump in your throat, whether it be the fear and the avoidance of opening up your laptop, whether it be even the fear of just becoming curious about something that you've always wanted to do. Get over that mountain and begin. Because if you don't start, you're not headed anywhere. If you're not walking or moving your feet, you're not going in any direction. And progress is not linear. However, progress must take place to get somewhere new. And in order to do something new, you have to do something you haven't tried before. And that always is scary because you're out of your comfort zone. It's uncomfortable. It is fear-inducing. It is stressful, but you have to learn to do it scared.
Thank you, Shay, for joining me on the Core Women podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been a pleasure. You can follow Shay Walker on LinkedIn at Shay Walker, on Instagram at RecLaw, on TikTok at Shay the They.
Yes. And I'll spell out my Instagram as well.
Okay.
ReklaWceo. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for joining us on the Core Women podcast with Dr. Summer Watson. We're so glad you're here and would love to connect more with you. Find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Core Women, and on Twitter at Core Women 1. For more about Core Women and Dr. Watson, visit corewomen.com. Want more support and resources for amazing women like you? Great! Join Dr. Watson and Jen Fontanilla at the Life, Love, and Money Collective, a Core Women production that aids in understanding the key traits that might be getting in the way of living a life that you are absolutely passionate about. Connect with Summer and Jen and find out more at thelifeloveandmoney.com.